Please welcome writer, director, producer, Todd Field.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Wow. Thank you for coming.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you for being here. I'm geeking out. When I introduced the film, Todd, I mentioned that like everybody has been celebrating Cate Blanchett's, deservedly, her towering achievement, but you deserve a lot of the credit. I mean, the film itself is, to me, as a towering achievement itself. The visual style, I've seen it a couple of times now, and the cinematography, that I'm pretty sure you worked pretty closer with Florian Hofmeister in the visual language of the film. And I'd love to talk to you about that. The fact that at first it's invisible almost, the camera work, but if you start analyzing, it tells you a lot about what's happening. Tell us about working with Florian.
Well, I never worked with Florian before, and I'd only worked with Antonio Calvache, who I went to the American Film Institute with. And but in the interim years, the last 16 years, I've basically been working in advertising. So I'd worked with many, many cinematographers, and it was a very exciting period actually to work, because in advertising you have to be very nimble, and you have to make decisions very quickly, and the cinematographer arrives like the day before, and they say, what are you doing? And you go, well, we're going to do this, and then that's what you do, you know. And you also are using equipment, and you're skunk working a lot of technology that the feature world doesn't even have yet. It's always R&D in advertising. You're always getting stuff first. So part of the mandate for this picture was that I would be the only American from the studio. That's what I agreed to. And that I would hire out of Germany as much as I could. And Florian's work I'd seen. Have any of you ever seen
The Terror?
The Terror.
Edward Berger, who did,
All Quiet on the Western Front. So Eddie, I called him up, and I was struck because the light on that show was all done on a stage in Budapest, with green screens and blue screens, and and lighting. But there's a quality of really true daylight that Florian was able to capture through that's just absolutely exquisite. And he and Eddie had gone to school together, and he said, you should talk to him, and so we began a conversation early on, and that conversation evolved in terms of we were both kind of gearheads, and we're both really ridiculous about experimenting. So we started sort of chasing all sorts of things, and in terms of the equipment, and developing new lenses for this, and getting into a color system with Aeroflex that now they integrate into all their camera systems, and 4 months of lighting tests that I'd never had the luxury of doing that before with a cinematographer.
But all of that is dictated by her performance and the character, correct?
Well, no. I mean, that part of it was really dictated by the feeling of the light and the capture method. In terms of the camera blocking, yes. I mean, the camera blocking, there were very simple rules, which was she must drive editorial. So I wanted to give her no safety net. I wanted to have as few angles as possible. So other than a few shots that that I kind of knew at the script stage, mostly it was about coming in, spending an hour rehearsing, finding where the camera would be. Okay, we're on a 29, 3 feet high. We're over here. and marking it out, and then bringing in everybody lighting and shooting, and that was really it. So, I mean, the camera moves when it should move, you know, or when it feels like it ought to move, either, but mainly when she's driving something, you know.
I noticed that, like face-wise, you know, close-ups, there is like a private Lydia, and the camera is at a different distance that when she's in public.
Yeah, that's very true. So we first see her, I mean, there's kind of 4 points of view available. You know, the first one is subjective, you know, and it could be almost Elizabethan, like a foot soldier coming on stage and seeing the king asleep under a tree at night in camp. And you're wondering if the soldier's going to put a knife in the belly, you know, and that's when you're seeing her sort of asleep on this aircraft, right? And somebody's texting snide remarks back and forth. And then basically, it's mostly objective. You know, that first very long scene, the camera's completely objective.
Which you put as like an audience member, that
Right.
we're like...
As if you were sitting here, you know, and you're watching two people trying to impress you, you know?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're playing the same game, right? I mean, this is the same thing right here. We're trying to be charming and interesting and intelligent. And that's really what that scene is about. And so what's important is that you buy in as an audience member, and so that when you come out of that scene, you feel as if you've seen this person who has a level of mastery and language, you know, mainly. And then you meet her in a situation that's where you're allowed a little more access to her, and you can see she's uncomfortable because she's having to service this relationship with this benefactor, right? This amateur conductor, you know, the financial guy. And then you see her, and now she's in a classroom, and now she's driving everything. She's rolled up her sleeves, and there's about 36 different camera setups in that scene.
But you only do one shot.
Yes, correct. There's only one shot. So I mean, that was a very important decision. And I remember, you know, telling Florian, look, I've been thinking about this. We have to do it in one. We're gonna have to get all of that coverage in one shot. And he said, well, you can't do it. And I said, well, I know we can't use a steady cam, and we can't use wires, and we can't get a crane in there and paint it out. But we have to figure out a way to do this. And we pulled over on the side of the road, and I went out in Berlin, and I called Cate. She wasn't there yet, and I said, listen, just so you know, we're going to do it in one. And she said, oh, but you can't do that. And it wasn't because she was frightened, because she would take on any challenge. But she said, you can't do that because the kid's leg, I have to see the kid's leg. And I said, no, we'll figure that out. Don't worry about the kid's leg. And she said, okay, you really want to do it in one? I said, yeah, we're going to do it in one.
But Todd, sorry to interrupt. It's a brilliant sequence. The fact that you needed all these different shots integrated into one single shot. I'd love to hear the thought pattern. Why did it need to be one?
Because again, you start out, you meet her as an audience member, and it's objective. You need to buy in the way this relationship we're having right now. If we were in a classroom situation and I was moving through this space with you, and if I was coming down and sitting here next to you, it needs to feel that immediate. You need to have that kind of strange classroom intimacy. And the only way to do that without, you know, cut, reverse sort of situations, and it'd be a very cutty scene, it's a 10-minute scene anyway, is to take the editorial control away from Monica Willie, my editor, and myself, and have the character have enough agency to where, you know, as she says, time is the thing. Time is the essential piece of interpretation. You know, so she's interpreting it. She's driving that. She's driving every moment when she goes to the student, and she's, you know, trying all these different tactics to bring him on side for the point she's trying to drive home, and being unsuccessful. That tempo's changing for her. You know, it's getting much faster as that film goes. I mean, as the scene goes on.
Am I wrong to say that that's the scene that sets the tone for the rest of the film? I mean, when I saw that scene, I was like, I was blown away by it.
Well, it's the first scene I wrote, and then I continued to write. I mean, I wrote this script in 12 weeks, and but I would go back to that scene at the end of every day, and go back and go back and go back to it. And it really, the impetus for that scene was sort of, you know, what would you tell yourself as a middle-aged person if you could go back and talk to your 24-year-old self, you know, and would your 24-year-old self give a shit about your 50-year-old self, you know? And the answer is probably no, you know, because when she came out of Harvard, and she was trying to do the same things as this student was. She was trying to break glass ceilings. She was trying to do experimental music. She didn't care about canonical work. She was this student, you know? And I think there's a lot going on with her in this scene, you know. She's creating the sort of pachyderm in the room, which is she's attacking the music that the student has chosen as an exercise for her to critique. And that music was written by a younger woman and very popular in the classical music world, with a gigantic profile. And we see she's struggling to write her own version of that, right? So, I mean, you know, methinks the lady doth protest too much. You know, she's going after this whole thing about Bach, and I'm sure she believes that on the one hand, but on the other hand, she's being a total hypocrite. You know?
And then later on, we have the scene where she runs onto the stage, you know, towards the end. And, you know, can you tell us about the camera work in that scene? It's just spectacular. When we see her as if she were
when she charges on stage from stage right, yeah. So yeah, that was I knew that at the script stage. I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. I knew I'd be on a 36-foot Super Techno crane. I knew I'd be on a 29mm lens. I knew exactly how I wanted to do it.
When you were writing the film.
When I was writing it, yeah. The problem was that we had this. We were at the Dresden Philharmonic, this beautiful vineyard-style concert hall. It had only been open 18 months. It was brand new. And there was no way to get a techno crane on stage. And these were just...
Let's explain what a techno crane is.
Well, some of you know what a techno crane is, I'm sure. But a techno crane is a magical instrument, which is... and the very finest practitioner of it is a techno crane operator here in Los Angeles who's just gold, named Bogdan, but you can't get Bogdan in Berlin. Bogdan does everything. Like if you look at La La Land, all that swooping camera work, there's a reason Linus, thanked him, Linus Sandgren, when he won the Oscar for La La Land, because Bogdan is incredible. And I've worked with him extensively in advertising. So I knew it would be a 36-foot techno crane, but techno cranes, the base of them weigh about 2 tons. So you have to be able to get them somewhere. And to do this shot, we needed to get a 2-ton techno crane on a very delicate acoustic stage that was, you know, really very, you know, they don't want you putting stuff like that up there. So we had to take out all the seats, and we had to build up this platform, and we had to bring it in, you know, in pieces and with mechanics, and put the thing together, you know, bolt by bolt, so that we could actually get that shot. It's a tricky shot when you work with techno cranes with actors. It's one thing to chase an actor with a techno crane and just hope they don't stumble and you don't impale them. But it's also very dangerous when they're charging toward a techno crane, as Cate was, because she had to hit a mark, and she had to dive below the thing at a very specific moment onto a pad. And if she mistimed it, there was a very good chance, you know, she could, you know, have a concussion, you know. So there was it was a very technical shot to get, but that's the only way to get that shot.
Well, but the whole point why I want to like systematically hear you talk about this stuff is that the precision, not only in the writing, and you visualized it, but the way you know, finally created the film. There's so much precision. I want to follow up with the shot in the Asian parlor, massage parlor. I was blown away. I've seen it twice now, and I'm always blown away by the fact that it's so seamless when she walks out of it, but then there's a moment in which it goes from very steady into this handheld.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point to that. So, yeah, I remember we'd shot all day. I was trying to figure that out because that was at the very tail end of the shoot. We had 6 days in Southeast Asia, and we were all very happy to be there. It was very cold in Berlin when we left. It was a year ago. It was in December. And I remember the last day we had gone into the Stiel, into the Holocaust Museum, and the snow was coming down, and it was just brutal and freezing. And then we were slingshot, into this tropical paradise, and we didn't lock up the street or anything. We just had her just burst out of this place, and we kept thinking, well, how is this, how's this going to feel? And inevitably, the way to do it, and then what we decided to do was I said, just get me a set of sticks, and we had a standard, and just put a shot bag on top of it, and keep it very, very still, so it's still cutting. So you come out of it, it's pretty stately, She comes out, you're in a wide shot. And then as she's coming out, I said to the other Florian, we had like 3 Florians on this. So this is like, we have a Florian, was a gaffer, Florian Hofmeister was a DP, and then there was this third Florian Emmerich, who was the local operator when we were in Asia. I said, just wait till she gets about 3 feet from the camera, and then just pick it up and just go with her, and that was the way to do the shot. It was just, she had to motivate the looseness of the camera. It couldn't begin that way, but it would violate all the rules of the rest of the vernacular, visual vernaculars.
And the last technical question, when it comes to cinematography, is the last shot, which again, you use a technocrane, I'm guessing, and the fact that we needed to pan through the audience.
Yeah, and that was a shot. Again, I knew it when I wrote that scene. That, okay, this is going to be a 65-foot techno, and that was, oh God, I remember because I sent Marco Bittner-Rosser ahead, who was our production designer, and I sent Sebastian Farbrix, who was my first AD and co-producer. I sent them ahead, and Florian and I were still back in Berlin, and they kept saying, they're sending us locations, and we'd say, yeah, this will work. And they kept saying, we can't get the techno in. I was like, oh, here we go again, because we'd started the whole movie with this techno crane problem. And that last shot is the last shot in the film. I mean, that was the last thing we shot. And so we took a 65-foot techno crane way out in the boonies, in the middle of nowhere. And we sat people on apple boxes, and we rehearsed it over and over and over just to figure out the height, because it was one thing just to get the techno crane up the rake. It was another thing in terms of literally inches to whether or not we could get the entirety of the shot, but also could we achieve it with what a technocrane does is it has a telescope on it, so it can smoothly retract, or it can push, right, and it can go very, very slow, or it can go wickedly fast. And in this case, it was very, very slow. But as you retract, you have to adjust for the retraction to keep the same level. If we were coming up the rake here, right, you guys you're going up, 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 up. So you have to adjust the arm like this. Well, we could only adjust the arm about that much, before we ran out of room, because we could barely get the thing into this theater. I mean, it's just interesting. It's probably a boring conversation for you guys.
Todd, when I introduced the film, I said, you're one of the people I'm most in awe of. And it's the fact that what you just say, the fact that when you sat down to first write the script, you were thinking all of this, and that is remarkable. You wrote this for Cate Blanchett in mind. And it's a role that requires her to master conducting. She also needed to learn to speak German. And so on and so on. I mean, there were so many requirements on an actor.
There were, but Cate would be the first person to say, so what? Like
she did them.
No. I mean, she would, because I mean, those were manifest in the script, just like the techno crane. Like, we have to have a techno crane. You have to learn to conduct. You have to learn to speak German. You have to learn to play Bach for real. You have to have an American accent. You have to learn to do stunt driving. You have to learn how to do all these things. Everything that you see that she does on screen is real. Like, she's weaving around Alexanderplatz at 65 miles an hour, with 6 drivers that are going right past her. You only see a couple of them, but there's people all over the place. She has to sit down in that Juilliard scene, and she has to play Bach. That's her note for note. She has to be able to conduct. She has to be able to do all this stuff. But that's just a given, right? I mean, and then there's, but that's, that's impressive from an educational standpoint, from an academic standpoint, but what she does with this character, that's really the thing,
She assimilates everything. She makes it look like it's a given, and then she creates the character from that.
Right, but that's what, I can't speak for her. She's not here, but I'll try, which is, that's what she would want to talk about. She would want to talk about the character, not the character's background, education, or skill set, because that's really what we're watching, right? I mean, the other things are a given. And yeah, there was a huge amount of effort. She had to learn to do all these special skills. She had a year to do it. And initially, when I sent her the script, she said, okay, let's go. And I said, yeah, let's go. And then there was another lockdown in Berlin. So I wanted to shoot this so that it took place during a 3-week window in November, roughly this time of year, because it's very flat light in Berlin. It's all negative light, and I wanted all the trees, to be barren, or as barren as possible. Well, once the other lockdown came, there was no choice. We had to kick it a year, because we were going to have to start with all of our interiors and work our way into November, so then we could shoot out windows and we could actually go outside, right? And that was a very lucky break, for the film, not for the world, but because it gave her an enormous amount of time. Now, she made 2 other pictures in that 9-month period, but as she was working, she would work in Budapest, and at the end of the day, she would come home, she'd call me, we'd be on the phone for 2 or 3 hours, or she'd come home and she would go right into a piano lesson with her teacher from Budapest, or she would get on a Zoom call with Natalie Murray Beale and start doing beating patterns, or she'd be, all of this. She had 9 months of preparation, and she's the kind of person who wants to know everything. So by the end of that 9 months, whatever research I had done, I had sat with John Mauceri, the great John Mauceri, who had really schooled me in a lot of this. She had gone so far beyond me, and she probably learned more in an autodidactic way in a year than this character would have learned in 25.
What would have happened if you had not found an actor that could have done everything that was required in the role?
Well, I mean, I wrote it for her. I would never have made the movie without her. I'd met her 10 years ago. Joan Didion and I had written a script together, and we were desperate to have her do it. And so I had a long meeting with Cate in New York, and she said she wanted to do it. And I was so struck in that meeting by her, that she has such an incredible intellect. She's one of the most, she's always at the pitch of perception, and she walks around narrative in the way that a filmmaker would. Not just, she looks at it as a performer, as a practical matter, but she also looks at it, the entirety of the story. A lot of that has to do with her stage background, and I felt really determined that I wanted to be in dialogue with her. So when I started writing this, she kind of just appeared on the desk, and I'd show up every day and look at a yellow Post-it with her name on it and say, "Good morning, Cate," and she said nothing. And I would just say, "Good morning, Cate," and she said nothing. And, and so when I handed the script into the studio, they said, "Do you have anyone in mind for this role?" And I said, "No, I don't." And because I'm terrified that they might make a call to her agent or whatever. It's very important how you're offered things. I didn't want her to get spooked, So, after about 4 weeks, my wife said, "When are you going to call her?" And And I said, well, you know, and she's like, you quit being so sheepish, call her, you know. And she said yes immediately. But had she not said yes, I honestly don't think I would have made the film.
Just to clarify one point is the heartbreaking scene between Cate and Nina Haas, who plays her wife, and they're in the car, and they're in the Alexander Plants roundabout. Is that the way, when you were writing it, that's the way you visualize it, that they would be in that roundabout?
No, I would never have been so foolish as to contemplate that, because that really came from my first AD, Sebastian. And Sebastian and I had, we've worked together in advertising for 14 years, and we've shot all over the planet. We've shot in Cairo, we've shot in, you know, India, we've dropped in and been commandos everywhere. So when he says something that it's possible, I believe him, because we've been chased with machine guns and almost thrown in jail and had to throw cameras in the backs of cars, you know. So I said, Sebastian, I've got this, you know, you see what I want to do with the scene? He goes, oh, well, there's only one place to do it. And I said, where? He goes, Alexanderplatz. And I said, yeah, man, they can't do Alexanderplatz. There's like 5 roads. First of all, safety-wise, there's like 5 roads that feed that roundabout. Like to try to do a lockup in Berlin. And in Berlin, the bikers rule. Like anyone that's been to Berlin, you know, cyclists rule, right? And the reason they rule is because there was a period of time where bikers would go around and they would carry heavy chains. And if cars got too close to them, they just go bam on the hood, you know. So everyone drives around Berlin like this, you know. Like everyone's afraid of cyclists, you know, and they don't stop, you know. And so the idea that we were going to tie up this major thoroughfare and have Cate Blanchett and Nina Haas and me in the back with like a bicycle hat on my, you know, helmet on my, going like, oh God, what am I doing?
It's one take, guys. There's no editing. That is one take, and Cate is driving that car. Yeah. At 60 miles per hour.
Yeah. So
I'm guessing, because it looks pretty fast.
No, she's going really fast. And so what we had to do was we had to go out to this, went way out to Bavaria, where there was this racetrack. And we had to get all these pylons and put them around and to the exact configuration of that roundabout with all these stunt drivers. And we had to rehearse it, you know, and Cate really likes to drive fast, you know, and she's convinced that she's a really good driver. But you don't really know that or not the first couple of times you're sitting in the back seat of that car. And that was a really interesting sort of process, to be honest.
Yeah, but it's an amazing sequence because it feeds into the character and it feeds into the relationship and the breakup.
And that's how it would feel if you were a child. I always think that, like, I mean, this has to do with the, you know, making decisions about how do you photograph something and what should it feel like. And it's really hard, you know, like that car is a wonderful car. I mean, that's the fastest car Porsche's ever made, you know, and I took that car out on the track. It was really fun to drive. But you know, you see a car like that and all you want to do is shoot it. It's a really sexy car, you know, and there's so many different ways to do that, which would be a giant mistake because you want to feel like you're in the car. And obviously if you're in the car, there's only one place the camera can be, which is in the back seat, you know. So then it's really just a question of how much can you see? And again, you know, like we see her enter that roundabout at the beginning. Maybe you're not really paying attention. And there's a couple of cars that kind of drift past, you know, that were you in that car, you would go, oh. It's not until that last one when she brakes that it really gets you. But what you don't see is on the driver's side, there's 2 or 3 other cars. I mean, she's just going, you know, the whole time. Anyway, this is enough about
There's
the car.
There's so much I want to ask you. Working with your composer, extraordinary work that she did. You know, can you tell us about working with her? And it's like, you know, you're dealing with Mahler and you're dealing with all this symphonic music, but then the score, it's nothing like the classical music we're hearing.
Right. So that we have this. You have the canon that you're dealing with the Mahler and the Elgar and many other pieces for the audition
Hildur.
pieces.
I'm sorry, I haven't.
Hildur Gundadottir. Yeah. And Hildur, you would all know if you saw Chernobyl.
The Joker, she won the Oscar
for Joker. Yeah, but she was a giant, artist for Deutsche Grammophon before she did any kind of film or television music. And I'd listened to her for many, many years. And she worked famously often with Johan Johansson, the late Johan Johansson. And she was, such an incredible person to be able to collaborate with. She, when I sent her the script, and she's a cellist on top of it, And the story with Hildur is when her mother was pregnant with her, all she did was play the Elgar Concerto. And she said, when my daughter's born, her name will be Hildur, and she will play the cello, and she will play the Elgar Concerto. So I was really lucky, because when I sent her the script, she said, "Oh, yeah, this is me. I'll do it." There wasn't much money, and so we started talking, and she asked me. The first question she said, "How does she move?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, everybody has a tempo. And I feel like this character has a tempo. How does she move?" And I said, She said, "Well, is there a piece of music that you listened to when you were writing the script?" And I said, "Yeah, actually there was." And I actually always thought of it as the Tar March. And it was this Goretzky piece that I loved by the Kronos Quartet. I've been listening to it since I was in film school. And she said, "Well, send it to me." And I did. And she said, "Okay, bum, 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 bum." It's 120 beats per minute. She says, "Okay, that's her internal rhythm. That's her gait. She walks at 120 beats per minute. So I'm going to get the London Contemporary Orchestra. We're going to record some music for it, and she can hear that in her ear." Now, this is music you don't even ever hear in the movie. And so she tempo mapped these other characters. And then she said, "Okay, you're coming to Berlin in a week. Let's get together." So we met at her studio. And she said, let's spot the film. And I said, "But we don't have the film." She says, "You have the script. Let's spot it. Let's decide what the music does, where it comes in. And we can always change it, but let's decide that now. Because you have all this concert music, and the people that make, a half an hour of music for real on screen, it would be absurd to try to underscore their lives. We have to find another way in. We have to figure out what the sonic space is for this, what that frequency is, what you want it to do, and why it appears." And so the decisions that we made were essentially the first time she kind of feels like there's this thing on her back, and first time we see her in the hotel after the Juilliard scene, and she's sort of brushing her hair, and she turns, and it's the first time that this sort of sonic thing comes in, and that was a really, really carefully recorded track that she made, and there's about 40 minutes of it in the film. It's mixed very, very low, and you're really only aware of it, hopefully, sort of in like the seventh reel from its absence when it cuts out.
Mm-hmm. And working with Bina Dageler, the costume designer who did Almodovar's Volver, All About My Mother. The clothing is so amazing. What Cate wears, and
it is amazing. Yeah, Bina often works with Pedro Almodovar. She was nominated for an Oscar for Mulan. She's done all kinds of things from period costumes to contemporary costumes. And what Bina will tell you, and what if you do this kind of work, which is that. It's always fun to be able to point at costumes. It's a very, very tricky thing to do contemporary costumes and to get very, very specific about it. And she has such an incredible way of working. The way she first starts is really the inside out. And you wouldn't think about that. But she really is trying to think, how does someone move? So if you look at this character, she's completely tailored until she isn't, and then it's almost like a thread comes out, and like a sleeve gets a little looser, and the pants maybe kind of go like this, and so that by the end, hopefully you don't get caught, but by the end she's in a very, very different space in terms of, having the clothes wear you, you know, as opposed to you wearing the clothes. Bina's also an incredible person to collaborate with because she, again, very much like Cate, and she's somebody that really sees the entire film, and she's not afraid to talk about the entire film, and that means she's not afraid to talk about any of the other departments. She's an incredible communicator, and with the most wonderful way of gently giving you a better idea, you know.
And a last question, because I'm being told that we need to wrap it up, but the editing, I love the editing work in this film, and you work with Monica Willie. Can you tell us about how the editing process was like for you? Working with
Monica Willie. So Monica Willie, you would all know because she has been the editor for all of Michael Haneke's films. And she's also worked with Uli Seidel and other people, and she's won every possible European award. She's never worked on an American film, and I've been chasing her for years. And we had a couple false starts on films that didn't happen, but she has the most incredible, delicate sensibility and sense of rhythm that I really appreciate. And this was a very challenging thing for Mona because she goes by Mona. Because she was in Vienna at the time, and we were supposed to cut in Vienna because she has a child about the same age as I do, and we figured it wasn't necessary for us both to suffer, you know. But there was a lockdown when we finished, both in Vienna and in London, so the only place that we could cut was in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, and we holed up at this like 14th century nunnery, you know. I lived in the pigsty, you know, and she lived in the main house, and there was nothing to do, you know. Neither one of us could drive on that side of the road, so we just cut 7 days a week, you know. But it was very quiet, other than the sheep and sometimes the birds in the North Sea. So we would shoot a lot of Foley outside. So it was a lot of sound work, you know. And she's used to doing that in a really beautiful, tactile way, the way that you're used to as a student when you're in school. So we shot a great deal of sound, and we would shoot it back to Stephen Griffiths, our sound designer in London. And by that time we finally got out of that lockdown, and we were doing our first temp at Abbey Road, the sound design was set. For the most, in large part, it had been done, and we'd had a incredibly focused period of time. So again, you know, bad for the world, but the pandemic actually created incredible focused atmosphere in which to work with her. Were there any
discoveries because of this lockdown?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, you know, we got through a version of the film pretty quickly, and we would watch it down. In the mornings, we would go out. We'd do a 4.5-mile walk or run together, and we'd come back and have coffee and talk through the work, and then we'd watch it down, you know. And I knew we were going to be okay when we got to the point where I'd say, "How did you feel about her today?" And she'd say, "Oh, I don't know. I didn't like her so much today." And "How did you feel?" And I'd say, "Well, I don't know. You know, it's kind of indifferent to her, you know." And then we'd watch it 2 or 3 days later, and I'd say, how did you feel about her today? And she said, "Well, today I kind of admired her. I kind of liked it. She had so much dignity at the end. I really felt it today, you know. How about you?" And "No, I hated her today, you know." So, I mean, once we got into that point, then we were really dealing with you know, very, very specific things that were more technical, you know.
Were you ever wondering, and I'm thinking about you and Mona, thinking about moments in which the audience would sympathize more with her, or?
No, and that was sort of that across the board, that was sort of, you know, I mean, that would have, no, I mean.
Mm-hmm. No, you answered. And then last, I've always admired the scene with her daughter and the stuffed animals and the orchestra, and then she tells her it's not a democracy. Was that always in the original script, your idea?
No, well, I mean, the orchestra was. It's not a democracy was something that was a line that was floating around in the air. But no, that was an ad lib from Cate. And actually, that scene was an ad lib, which was we were shooting another scene in the other room, and while we were getting that setup ready, I looked over and I saw Cate on the floor with her, and I grabbed the camera and just, and
Wow.
go, you know. So I mean that was just one of those lucky moments, you know, and we got it. But no, I got the childhood orchestra thing. That was something I stole from Dudamel. I think Dudamel. I think there's a documentary about Dudamel where he talks about his mother telling him that story, that he used to set up his toys like an orchestra. Yeah.
Well, speaking of lucky moments, this is a lucky moment to have you here. It means a lot. I've admired you for so long, and to be able to talk to you, yeah, I can like die now, and I'll be a happy guy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming.